Welcome, everybody, to Sports Fluent Fantasy Live. We're going to kick the show off this week with the number one question that probably everyone's asking, and it's the number one question that I've been getting. So, the Pittsburgh versus Tennessee game this week. Obviously, as you know, there's been a bunch of COVID cases, and we're not sure if they're going to play, and if they do play, when they're going to play. So how does that affect fantasy is obviously the question for this show. So, and it's a tricky one. If they play on Monday or Tuesday, which is kind of what they're saying now, then it will count to your week 4 fantasy points. Now, depending on what platform you use, you've probably already seen some changes for your Tennessee players and for your Pittsburgh Steelers players, where in some cases it's saying the game's postponed. I play one of my leagues is on the ESPN app, and that one says they're on a bye week. So it's a tough one, especially if you have a lot of Pittsburgh or Tennessee players on your team. In one of my leagues, I actually have Derrick Henry, I have James Conner, and I think I have the Pittsburgh defense. So I've got 3 or 4 players that I'm going to have to figure out what to do with. So what I would do right now, if I were you, is assume that they're not going to play and just kick them out for now. Okay, I know it's tough. Like I said, especially if you have a lot of players from those teams, you just put them off, kind of work your waiver wire, go to your bench. That's why it's there, and just keep your Pittsburgh and Tennessee players out until, obviously, hopefully you don't have a lot of people in Thursday's game. As we find out more information on Friday, on Saturday, heck, into Sunday morning about what's happening with the Pittsburgh Steelers-Tennessee game. So that's that game. So that one's going to be tough. I've purposely kept Steelers players and Tennessee Titan players out of my starts and sits for this week because obviously we're so unsure of what's going to happen. Let's hope that this is just kind of a one-time small thing with COVID, and that it doesn't expand to other teams in the league, because obviously, 1, that'd just be a terrible thing to happen, but 2, it's going to play havoc on your fantasy lineup. So we're going to kick the show off with some important injury news. Jimmy Garoppolo is still a question mark if he's going to play this week. If you had Tariq Cohen in your lineup, he has been put on injured reserve. He's out actually for the season. So it brings up an interesting one. So it's one of our questions, actually, that we're going to kick it off with. Cordell Patterson. Is he someone that you can put into your lineup as a flex, as a filler 1 week? I don't know. I think you're going to see a lot of those touches go into David Montgomery. You're going to probably see the Bears, now with Nick Foles, go more kind of Montgomery as kind of the lead back, and then maybe pass the ball a little bit more to their tight ends, to the wide receiver. You'll probably see them with a higher volume of passing, which isn't actually good for their offense moving forward. So I wouldn't necessarily slot Cordell Patterson into that Tariq Cohen role. That being said, another big injury this week was to Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. So he's had a good start to the season, and the initial reaction is, well, let's jump all over Zach Ertz. He's just going to see all that volume in that Philadelphia offense. I wouldn't jump on that so quickly. 1, because they have a really tough matchup. We're going to talk about them on the start-sit segment of the show. But Zach Ertz, I don't think he's going to get a huge jump with Dallas Goedert being out of there. I think he's going to see a little bit of lift in volume of passes, but not huge. Okay, so let's jump right into the starts and sits. We're going to start with quarterbacks. So I've been really high since last year, right before he got hurt, on Matthew Stafford. He's starting to round back into form, I think. I think you're going to see more out of the Detroit offense moving forward. They've kind of dug themselves a bit of a hole this season. They're going to have to start passing the ball a little bit more. They're pretty shaky in the running game anyways. No offense to Adrian Peterson, but when he's your number 1 running back, you're going to have to throw the ball a lot. So look for Matthew Stafford against the Saints defense to have a nice game this week. The second one, and this one's he's had a really tough start to the season because he's had some bad matchups and he's just looked a little off. I think he really misses Hopkins, obviously. What quarterback wouldn't? But I think Deshaun Watson is a good start in Minnesota this week. Their defense has been horrible, giving up a ton of yards and some touchdowns. So look for Deshaun Watson to kind of have a bounce back game this week versus Minnesota. And then our sits at quarterback. This one might be a sit, a drop, and not just from fantasy. You might see Jalen Hurts come in and play some here for the Eagles. Carson Wentz against the 49ers is a definite sit this week. And like I said, we might not see Carson Wentz past week 5 or week 6 of the season because he's just looked awful. So Carson Wentz is a definite sit this week. The next one, and this one hurts me. This one, I don't know if you can see. There we go. There's the Bears hat right there. This one really hurts me because I said he should have been the starter from week 1 for the Bears. And then I realized, maybe they're going to bring him in later in the season. The thought process is let Mitch have his chance, go, 6-7 weeks. And then you bring in Wentz to do one of his, Philadelphia Eagles takes over the last half of the season and runs them through the playoffs kind of scenario. But they brought Nick Foles in last week. He had a great 6 minutes of football. Let's be honest, he wasn't great before the third quarter and the early part. The third quarter and the early part of the fourth quarter. But his last 6 minutes of the fourth quarter were fantastic. So he's going to be the starter this week against the Colts. Don't kid yourself. The Colts defense is better than you think. And don't look for Foles to kind of have a repeat performance. He's not going to be listen, Bears are winning this game. But I have to say that. But don't look for big fantasy points, I don't think, from Foles yet. We might talk about that in later weeks, but for this week, Foles is a sit. And then my sleeper. So this one's interesting for me because at the draft, right before the draft, I had Cynthia Freeland on from the NFL Network, and we talked about the Cincinnati Bengals and the number 1 pick. And I think both of us actually said I was probably the only person, or she was probably the only person who agreed with me that the Bengals shouldn't draft Joe Burrow. And not because he's a bad quarterback. I think he's a good quarterback, and what he's shown in the first 3 weeks is he's a very capable quarterback being thrown into that Bengals team. My issue why I said they shouldn't draft him is they had so many other holes that maybe they should look to move that pick for 2 or 3 other picks, and build up the rest of the team. They have no offensive line. You can see Joe Burrow running for his life, but he's proven me wrong so far, not with wins in real football, but you can see that he's got what it takes. And as long as he can stay alive behind that offensive line and with really very limited running game, Joe Mixon hasn't been great. Giovanni Bernard is Giovanni Bernard. He's not that great. So it's really Joe Burrow on his own. And we haven't seen, we thought AJ Green would be his go-to guy, and it hasn't been. It's been really Tyler Boyd and a little bit out of their rookie, who we're going to talk about a little bit later, so I'm going to save him, T. Higgins. So Joe Burrow is your sleeper this week. Again, the Bengals are one of those teams, you hear me say this kind of every week, where they're going to be down in games, right? So they're going to have to pass a lot, especially later on, in the second half of games. So that just gives them a lot of opportunities, and that's where Joe Burrow is going to kind of get his kind of late game touchdowns and pad to his yards a little bit because they have to. And then one to watch for. I'm going to actually give you 2 this week because he had a really bad week 3 after starting the season off surprisingly well for Jacksonville, and it's Gardner Minshew. So he's playing against Cincinnati Bengals. On that same note, he's going to have an opportunity to put up a lot of fantasy points this week. So look for Gardner Minshew also to have a good week. And also, so I'm going to give you 2 players to watch. One good, Gardner Minshew. One bad is Tom Brady. So I told you last week he was a start, and he was a great start, right? He put up some good numbers. This week, he has a tough matchup, and also he has another week where he's without Chris Godwin. Now, you remember in week 2, he also didn't have Chris Godwin, and from a fantasy perspective, it was terrible, right? As great as, I think I talked about on the podcast yesterday that I love the Mike Evans 2 receptions, 2 yards, 2 touchdowns game. It is my favorite thing I've ever seen from just not good for fantasy, though. So look for Tom Brady to really struggle this week in fantasy. I still think they get the win. All right, let's go to a question. So I mentioned we would talk about T. Higgins. So the question is T. Higgins or Brandon, Ayuk. So that's the 49ers wide receiver, if you didn't know. So I think short term, Brandon is the guy. If you look at the other receivers on that team, Bourne, I think Pettis, Sanu, Taylor, there isn't really a standout kind of number one with Debo being out. And with Kittle being out, because really in that 49ers offense, Kittle's really the wide receiver one, right? He's going to get most of the passes, most of the receptions thrown to him. He gets the most attention. So with those guys out, yeah, short term, I think him. But I think long term, don't be surprised if the Bengals, if they can, make a move to trade AJ Green to to a contender. I don't know if him and Joe Burrow have clicked. I don't know if AJ Green is just unhappy being there, but I don't think it's just not working. You can see that he's looking for Tyler Boyd a lot more than he is AJ Green. Obviously, T. Higgins had a big game last week, but don't look for him to repeat that this week. I think long term, so to the question, I think T. Higgins is the better kind of full season pickup if you're looking for one of those receivers. Because like I said, once San Francisco starts to get healthy, Brandon Ayuk's just not going to be a big part of that offense. He'll still be good, just not from a fantasy perspective. All right, so back to our starts and sits. Running backs. This guy shocked the heck out of me. And I thought the first week was a fluke, second week, but after the third week, all right, I'm sold. I'm in on James Robinson. He's a start at Cincinnati. The Jacksonville running back is he's fantastic. And so look, if you got him, start him. The next one is one that we liked 2 weeks ago, and he did right by us. And last week we said to sit him. He did what you would expect. He didn't perform very well. This week he's back on the starts. So Kareem Hunt, the Cleveland Browns. It's a matchup against Dallas where Cleveland's going to be down. And when they're down, it's not that they give up on the run and they give up on Nick Chubb, but when they're down, they throw the ball a lot more. That's where Kareem Hunt is at his best, coming out of the backfield. So look for him to get a lot more receptions this week, especially if you're in a PPR league. So go ahead and start Kareem Hunt if you got him. On the sits, so we've got a question on him too. So we'll kind of tie the two together. So the question is, Rex Burkhead, boom or bust type of player? Yeah. He really is. So Rex Burkhead is a sit this week, but it's always going to be, and nothing's changed with the Patriots. You never know which back you want to start. You never know. They're always difficult, though, the running backs in Coach Belichick's system or Josh McDaniel's system. Rex Burkhead had a great game, so you know he's going to come this week and do nothing. As now, last week was kind of a good situation for him. James White took the week off for personal reasons. I think his wife is having a baby. I expect him to be back this week, so now you can't really rely on him again. So yeah, he is very much boom or bust. So if there's some guys hurt or missing games for whatever reason, yeah, you can go ahead and start him. This week there's going to be some other running backs in the mix, so he's a guy that you're gonna sit this week. The other one was again, this is an up and down back that I think all season it's going to be 1 week start, 1 week sit, 1 week we might not even talk about him. But a sit this week against that Chargers defense is going to be Leonard Fournette. I wouldn't put too much emphasis if you got him. See if hopefully you have another running back that can take his place this week. And my sleeper, so I missed out on this one. on the waiver wire in a couple of my leagues. Myles Gaskin of the Miami Dolphins. He's going to have a nice game, I think. Like I said, he's a sleeper, but he's going to have a nice game this week against Seattle. That Miami offense is starting, it's funny with Fitzpatrick where you kind of see this from him every year. The first kind of 5-6 weeks, he does really well. The offense kind of clicks, and then I guess teams start to figure him out, or I don't really know what happens after the first few weeks, but he's not really the same after that. So take advantage of it now. The Dolphins offense doesn't look that terrible. Again, they're a team that's going to be losing, so they're going to have to try to catch up. But Myles Gaskin, a nice one there. Then a player to watch, and it's for a sad reason, unfortunately. because Todd Gurley is he's not that same guy that we know from years past. I think you're going to see as the season goes on, Hill's going to get some more touches in Atlanta, and he might actually end up being the one, if you don't have him already. We will. Is he on our? Oh, he's not. Okay, if you haven't picked him up on the waiver wire, if he's still available in your league, pick up Hill, the running back. He's kind of backs up Todd Gurley in Atlanta. He's going to be the one long term this season that I would go with. The demise of Todd Gurley, it's sad, but he's not he's a guy you want to watch for this week and kind of make a decision on. I wouldn't drop him necessarily, but maybe you can get someone who hasn't been keeping up to date, and you can trade him for something that you can use every week. All right, so we did T. Higgins, we did Burkhead. So question number 3, perfect timing, Fitzpatrick, Herbert, or Foles? Okay. Fitzpatrick's going to be very much matchup dependent, right? And unfortunately, sometimes he just has these great games against the teams that you don't expect, and then has a terrible game against a team he should play well against. So that's very matchup dependent. Foles, listen, the Bears offense the Bears as a whole, you can see I like Foles. He's right over my head, I think. They're really going to win games kind of ugly, right? They're going to use that, hopefully their defense hasn't really lived up to what it should be this season, but I think they will get better. But it's really going to be defense. It's going to be, hey, don't make any mistakes. So I don't think he's going to have now, again, matchup dependent. I'd put my money between those 3 on Justin Herbert. I like the Chargers. I think he's got the best weapons. Having Keenan Allen, who had a nice game last week. Williams, I think he's questionable, but when he's healthy. Austin Eckler, who's really he's a running back, but he's really a receiver out of the backfield. And then they've got I think Hunter Henry, the tight end. Like, they've got a lot of weapons for him to throw to, and he's gonna. They haven't been afraid to kind of let him loose. Now, again, it's going to depend on Tyrod Taylor, who had that terrible incident with the doctor puncturing one of his lungs. But as long as he's the starter for LA, of the 3, I like Herbert. I think he's got the most fantasy potential. So see how that goes. All right, so 2 wide receivers. So I mentioned earlier the Bengals. Joe Burrow feels very comfortable, although we saw T. Higgins get, like I said, the touchdowns last week. I think Tyler Boyd is the guy to start. Definitely this week and moving forward. I think he's going to be in the conversation as a wide receiver 1 this year. His matchup against Jacksonville's a good one. So you can feel good starting Tyler Boyd this week. Now, this next start is, as most cases, is dependent on health of Davante Adams. If Adams is sitting, or if he seems that he's not going to be 100%, you can go with Alan Lazard. Now, a lot of people have talked about Alan Lazard or Scantling, and the problem is, Aaron Rodgers said this last year, and I don't think his opinion has changed, is that he really likes Alan Lazard, and he likes what he brings to the table. He likes his attitude. He likes his route running. So if the quarterback likes the wide receiver, as you could see last week without Davante Adams, he's going to throw to that receiver, sometimes to a fault, but Aaron Rodgers is better than that to do it to a fault. So look for Alan Lazard against Atlanta, who, right, they'll probably be losing after 3 quarters by 20 points, and then the Green Bay Packers will come back and win. But look for Alan Lazard to have a big game this week as well against Atlanta. Sorry, Atlanta fans. It happens every week, so I don't know what to tell you. On the sits, Terry McLaurin from the Washington football team is one that would sit this week against Baltimore. Baltimore, I don't want to say they got embarrassed on Monday Night Football to the Chiefs, but they got embarrassed on Monday Night Football to the Chiefs. And they're going to come out, and I think they're going to have one of those really good, and I hope they do, right? Because if they don't, then they're in trouble for the rest of the season. I think they're going to come back and have a really big bounce-back game, and a lot of that's going to start with their defense. So, Washington isn't great offensively, right? Haskins and McLaurin. Look for Baltimore to really kind of impose their will this week, and it's going to hurt fantasy owners of anyone who has any Washington players. The other one is actually disappointment for me. I think I have him in 2 of my leagues, and I thought that with Phillip Rivers coming in, he would get a lot more. So T.Y. Hilton has really kind of been a disappointment in fantasy this year. And this week against Chicago, excuse me, I think he's a definite sit this week in Chicago. For sleepers, I can't believe I'm bringing up the Miami Dolphins so much. I got to be honest with you, but Devontae Parker versus Seattle, who's given up, I think the top 3 yards, they can't seem to stop anybody. And I think Adams is going to be out as well this week with an injury. So that secondary is a little bit bumped and bruised. Devontae Parker should have a nice game. So if you want to sneak him as a flex, you might be pleasantly surprised this week. Players to watch. So this one hurts me because 2 weeks ago, I think one of you guys asked the question about Darius Slayton. And I said, yeah, I like Slayton. I like Slayton actually better than Shepard. And I actually thought Daniel Jones was going to be better than he has been so far. So just keep an eye on Darius Slayton this week, and the whole Giants. And maybe it has to do with the Saquon Barkley injury, but look for the Giants. Just watch their offense and actually watch the game. You'll be able to make a decision whether he's can I trade bait him? Should I drop him? Just keep an eye on Darius Slayton this week because I think that he's on the downward trend, and it's more to do with his offense, less to do with actually his ability. Next question. Okay. Oh, this one I like. Mark Ingram and the Baltimore running game. So I just mentioned to you, Baltimore, expect them to have a big game this week. They were successful last year. One, because Lamar obviously played out of his mind, but also, right, if you looked at them, it was Mark Ingram, and even Gus Edwards and Lamar. Like they just had this running game where they had like 3-4 guys who were all getting like 70, 80 yards. Like it was ridiculous how much they ran the ball. This year they seem to be looking to move the ball downfield through the passing game a little bit more, and I think it's hurt them. So again, back to this game, look for them to really their defense and look for a heavy dose of Mark Ingram this week against Washington. So I would say he's still your guy, but it's tough because Dobbins and Edwards still get a lot of touches. But I think Ingram's going to emerge later in the season. I almost think they were kind of trying to save him a little bit. You'll see a lot of these teams that they know they're good. I said it about Kansas City, and I think you're going to see Kansas City do it as well with Edwards, Hillier throughout the season, where they know they're good. They know they're going to be in the playoffs. They don't want to have their backs, touching the ball 200 times. They don't want to do it. They want them fresh for the playoffs. So he's a guy that I think, you want to hang on to him because I think, although the first few weeks are going to be disappointed, mid-season, right, he's going to start rolling again, and you're going to be happy that you still have him. So still, I think Ingram's still going to be the lead back there in Baltimore. To our second last segment here, so tight ends, and then we'll do some waiver wires. Tight ends this week to start, TJ Hawkinson, Detroit Lions versus the New Orleans Saints. He has, he's been quietly having a nice season, but I think this is kind of going to be his game where, I have Matthew Stafford, I already told you, as a definite start at quarterback. I think Hawkinson's going to see some of that this week, so he's a good start this week. The second start of the week is someone we thought he was done. They were really, when the Bears signed Jimmy Graham this offseason, I said I don't understand what they're doing because I think it was their 10th tight end on the roster at the time. But he's really turned into, just a nice fantasy play, especially if you have, George Kittle who's hurt, if you had Goddard, if you had any of these tight ends that got hurt, or you just tend to stream tight ends because you didn't really draft a tight end anywhere near the top of the draft. He's a nice one to play this week against Indianapolis. Is going to be a nice game for him as well. But the superstar Jimmy Graham is back, and I think he's going to be Foles, and he should have been Trubisky's, but he's going to be Foles' kind of safety blanket, especially now with Tariq Cohen being gone, because Montgomery's not really a threat out of the backfield. So when he's in trouble and needs to kind of dump off, it's going to be to Jimmy Graham. And look also down the road, for him to really be looked at in the red zone a lot more as well. And you remember back a few years when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, Nick Foles, even in the Super Bowl, right? There was some gadget plays, but it was a lot of work to the tight ends. So that's something that Nick Foles is very comfortable with. So look for Jimmy Graham to have a nice week this week and to continue that for the next few weeks. Sits at tight end. So I mentioned this earlier where you thought Dallas Goedert injury was going to be a big lift for Zach Ertz. It might be, but not this week against the 49ers. Their defense is just, they shut down tight ends. They've allowed the fewest points to tight ends out of any team in the league. So although maybe 2 weeks from now, he might be a definite start, this week, Zach Ertz is a sit. The next one is Hayden Hurst going against the Packers this week. Atlanta, I don't know what's going on with Atlanta. To be honest, I'm surprised Dan Quinn still has a job there. But Hayden Hurst can be a sit this week. Then our sleepers. So I'm scared about this one. That's why I put him in sleeper instead of a start. But Dalton Schultz of the Cowboys, he's got a nice matchup against Cleveland. I think everyone's going to do, I think you're going to see Dallas put up some points this week and get a nice win in Cleveland. But I think of the tight ends, he's going to get 50 yards and a touchdown, which is nice for a tight end. So look for him to have a good game. And then our watch, it's the one person I kept on here for that Tennessee-Pittsburgh game, right, is Jonnu Smith. So if you're in kind of that tight end situation where you don't know who to play, right, keep an eye on whether he's going to play or not. Because obviously if the game, like I said, if the game gets rescheduled to Monday or Tuesday, start him. If it's not, then don't. All right. So let's see. Okay, we'll get to that question there in 1 second. And before we do, we'll just drop into our waiver wires. So this week, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to say it again because I put like 5. You can't see my sheet here, but I got 5 stars for caution of big weeks. So caution of big weeks. This isn't just for this particular player that I'm going to use this week. It's all the time. So what we do sometimes in fantasy is someone comes out of nowhere and they have a huge game. And there's actually one that I'll mention in the waiver wires because I think he'll have a nice games going forward, just not what he did last week. But he has a huge game, right? A guy goes off for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns, and you're like, oh, I got to get him. And then he never does anything again. So be cautious of those guys, like last week, Rex Burkhead. Great game, bunch of touchdowns, wonderful. He's not going to do that again this week. So don't rush out and get a guy like Rex Burkhead. Justin Jefferson, on the other hand, the wide receiver in Minnesota, he's actually has an opportunity to maybe not duplicate what he did last week, but he's really kind of said, hey, I'm the number 2 wide receiver here in Minnesota. Minnesota's going to have to throw the ball more. I think that obviously Thielen is the number 1. But hey, number 2 wide receiver with the ability that Justin Jefferson has, he's one. If he's still available on your waiver wire, go get him. Myles Gaskin, we talked about him as well. He's still not owned in a lot of leagues, so go after him if he's available as well. This one, I tell you, so these are the top 5, by the way. These are the top 5 that were picked up this week. So Jefferson, Gaskin. The third one is one that I would be very, very cautious of is Carlos Hyde. If you went out and used one of your waiver wire slots, or if you're in an auction league, be careful of Carlos Hyde because Pete Carroll today said that Chris Carson is actually practicing this week and might actually play on Sunday. It's going to be a game time decision, so he's not going to miss a lot of time. If he doesn't play this week, he'll be in next week. So Carlos Hyde, maybe not the guy you should go after, although when you saw that injury on Sunday, you thought Chris Carson was going to be gone for a long time. So I can understand everyone saying, oh, we got to jump out and get him. But Chris Carson's going to be back a lot quicker than we thought. The next one, Preston Williams, the wide receiver in Miami. Okay, Brandon Ayuk, again, the wide receiver in San Francisco. Again, short-term, not a bad play. Let's see, who do we have? Okay, we'll take one more question, and then, we're going to get to game 1 of, I guess, the second half of Lakers and Heat. By the way, I'm torn. I'm a Lakers fan, so I've got the Lakers winning, but I love the Heat, so hopefully it goes 7. So the last question is, Yeah, so we already talked about Alan Lazard. Would you start him this week? Yes, we're starting Alan Lazard this week. That's it for this week. Talk to you guys next week.